I remember the day I met her as if it were yesterday. It was autumn, and the crisp air carried the scent of dried leaves and freshly brewed coffee. We crossed paths in a neighborhood bookstore, among shelves full of stories yet to be discovered. She smiled, and in that moment, I felt as if the world had stopped. There was something in her gaze, in the way she laughed, as if everything we did together had a greater purpose. We were perfect, or at least, it seemed that way. We went from being two strangers to inseparable companions, building dreams and memories with every step. However, not all love stories end as one expects. And sometimes, those same memories that once brightened your life become shadows that haunt you. After her betrayal, every corner of our story changed color. What once was sweet now felt bitter, what once was solid now seemed to crumble. But how is it possible that everything we lived, everything we built, could vanish so quickly? Are memories only as strong as the love that holds them? Today, I'll tell you how that love went from being my greatest happiness to my deepest sorrow. It all began on an October afternoon, one of those days when the sun barely warms you, but the cold air makes you appreciate every ray. I remember stepping into that cafe seeking refuge from the wind, and there she was, sitting by the window with a book in her hands. She seemed so engrossed that, for a moment, I thought about not disturbing her, but something pushed me to approach. And so I did. It was as if fate had led me directly to that moment. We introduced ourselves between shy laughter and fleeting glances, and soon discovered we shared more than just a love for literature. That encounter, which seemed casual, quickly became something more. The first weeks were magical, filled with endless conversations, shared laughter, and the feeling that I had found someone with whom I didn't need to wear a mask. I was amazed at how easy it was to be with her, as if we had known each other our whole lives. I didn't have to try hard to be understood. Every weekend, we spent discovering the city together. We wandered through old streets, where every corner had a story, a whisper from times gone by. She always had a way of making me see things from a new perspective. She taught me to appreciate the small details, how the sun illuminated the buildings at sunset or how the sound of dry leaves underfoot could become a melody. She made me feel like the world, with all its corners and textures, was ours. And without even realizing it, I was falling deeply in love. We went from being two independent people to building a life together. It wasn't fast or abrupt, it was more like a gentle dance, where every step brought us closer. Dinners at home became sacred rituals, where we talked about our dreams, the books we wanted to write, or the places we would someday visit. Our life was simple, but full of meaning. Every little moment had a special glow when we were together. And there, in the midst of it all, I thought what we had was eternal. That we had found the kind of love poets write about, the kind of love that never dies. But can one ever be completely sure? Is it possible to foresee that the same spark that ignited the fire could one day be extinguished? I never thought betrayal could enter our lives. I always believed that the love we had would protect us, like a shield against anything bad that might happen. But I was wrong. I clearly remember the day I discovered what was going on. It was a Tuesday afternoon, an ordinary day. She had left her phone on the kitchen table while she was in the shower. A notification came through, and by pure chance, I glanced at it. At first, I didn't process it. It was a message from an unknown number, short and simple, but it changed everything. I miss you. 2 words that, in a matter of seconds, shattered years of trust. My heart started pounding so hard I could almost hear the beats echoing in my ears. I hesitated for a moment. Should I open it? Maybe it was just a misunderstanding, a mistake. But something inside me told me there was no turning back, that what I was about to find would forever change the way I saw her, the way I saw us. I opened the message. I read it once, twice, and then the images. Photos of them, smiling, in places we had visited together. Suddenly, I felt like a spectator in my own life, watching as everything I believed to be true crumbled before my eyes. I struggled to breathe, as if the air had thickened, becoming impossible to swallow. And in that moment, one question kept repeating in my head: how could she do this to me? When she came out of the shower, I knew something in my expression had changed. She noticed immediately, though she tried to hide it. I didn't say anything. For a few minutes, we just stared at each other in silence, as if we both knew that whatever we had up to that point no longer existed. She tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. Instead, I saw a mix of guilt and fear in her eyes. The same fear I was feeling, but for different reasons. My fear was for what was to come, for the devastation that would follow that revelation. Hers? I'm not sure. Maybe she knew there was no way to fix what she had broken. That night was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I stayed awake, replaying every moment together, every word of love, every promise we had made. Were they all lies? Had I been so blind not to see the signs? I wondered if, at any moment while we were together, she had thought of him. When did it start? Why didn't I see it coming? The idea tormented me that while I trusted her blindly, she had been sharing her life with someone else. The pain wasn't just from the betrayal itself, but from everything it represented. Suddenly, every memory we had built together was tainted. The romantic dinners, the trips, the little jokes only we understood, all turned into lies. And the worst part was, I couldn't stop thinking about it. I asked her directly, and her answers were hollow, full of excuses that didn't justify the pain I felt. She told me it wasn't premeditated, that it had just happened, as if betrayals were inevitable accidents. But I couldn't accept that. Betrayal, at least to me, was a conscious decision. She chose to cross that line, to break what we had built. That night, I faced the fact that what had once been so strong, no longer existed. I knew that even if we tried to repair it, even if she promised it would never happen again, something inside me had already been broken forever. Because it's not just infidelity that destroys a relationship, it's the loss of trust. And once that trust is broken, no matter how hard you try to piece it back together, the relationship is never the same. But still, I kept asking myself, what did I do wrong? Could I have prevented this? Or was it inevitable that it would all end this way? After the betrayal, I realized that the most painful part wasn't just the breakup itself, but what came after. The memories, which had once been my refuge, began to transform into cruel reminders of what we had lost. Every corner of our home was filled with echoes of the past, of moments that used to make me smile, but now only brought pain. We used to spend afternoons in the living room, watching movies cuddled up, laughing, talking about our plans for the future. Now, that same room felt cold, empty. Every time I sat there, I felt her absence, not the person she was, but the one I had imagined. I realized that the memories we shared no longer belonged to me, they had been stolen by the betrayal, tainted by the lies that had been behind them. One afternoon, while walking through our favorite park, where we used to stroll hand in hand, something inside me broke. I remembered how we used to stop at the same bench to watch the sunset. It was a place that had always brought me peace and happiness. But that day, the place felt different. What used to be a moment of calm had now become an unbearable weight. I sat alone on that bench, watching the same sunset we had shared so many times, and I wondered, how could something so beautiful become so painful? Every color in the sky reminded me of her, of what we had been. And I felt those moments, those memories, fading away like the sun sinking into the horizon. And so, slowly, the memories began to unravel. Each time I returned to one of our places, it felt like a part of me was eroding. The cafe where we met, the restaurant where we celebrated our first anniversary, those places that once glowed in my mind were now cloaked in shadow. It was as if the betrayal had reached out its hand and touched every happy memory I had, corrupting them, weakening them. I found myself battling my own thoughts. I wondered if it was possible to hold on to at least a few memories, if I could separate the happy moments from the person who had betrayed me. But every time I tried, I failed. Every attempt to recall a good moment became tangled with the image of her deception, like a stain I couldn't erase. The memories of our travels, our laughter, our deep conversations by candlelight, all intertwined with the bitter reality that she had chosen someone else. And then I questioned myself, were those moments really as perfect as I remembered? Or was I simply idealizing a relationship that was always bound to break? Sometimes, I caught myself thinking about those little details, her laugh when I told a joke, how she would hold my hand as we walked together. And for a second, I felt nostalgia. But then reality set in. I remembered what she had done, the lies, the secrets, and those details that used to make me happy now only filled me with anger. The love that had once made me feel invincible had become my greatest vulnerability. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't escape those memories. And I came to a painful realization: I wasn't just letting go of her, I was letting go of a part of myself. Because those moments we shared, those memories we built, were no longer what they used to be. They had disintegrated. With each passing day, I felt like I was losing a piece of myself, as if the memories that had once given me strength were now fading into oblivion, taking with them the love I once had. I wondered if I would ever be able to reclaim those memories for myself, if I could look at a photo or walk through a place without feeling that sharp pang in my chest. But deep down, I knew that those memories, like our relationship, were destined to disappear, to become shadows of what once was. Because, in the end, how can you hold on to something that has been broken in such an irreversible way? At first, I didn't know how to move forward. I woke up every day with the same weight on my chest, wondering how I was going to face the world without that part of me that she took away. But there came a moment when I realized I couldn't stay trapped in that dark place forever. I had to learn to heal. I knew it wouldn't be easy and that the process would be slow, but there was no other option. I had to rebuild myself. The first thing I did was distance myself from everything that reminded me of her. At first, it seemed impossible because she had left her mark on every corner of my life. But little by little, I began creating new spaces, new habits. I stopped going to the places we used to visit together. I found a new cafe, a smaller and quieter place, where I could sit and think without the memories suffocating me. It was a small but significant step. The next step was to face my emotions instead of running from them. I realized I had been avoiding the pain, trying to bury it under the daily routine, but that only made it stronger. I started allowing myself to feel. I cried more than I'd like to admit, but those tears, though painful, were necessary. It wasn't just crying over her betrayal, it was also for the version of myself that I had lost in the process. Then came the moment when I had to forgive myself. For a long time, I blamed myself for what had happened, thinking that if I had been different, if I had done things differently, maybe all of this wouldn't have happened. But at some point, I understood that her betrayal wasn't a reflection of my worth. I could spend hours wondering what I did wrong, but the truth is, it wasn't my fault. I had to stop carrying that guilt if I really wanted to heal. I wasted a lot of time dwelling on what I couldn't change, and it was at that moment that I decided to let it go. That was a crucial step, freeing myself from self-blame. I began doing things that reminded me of who I was without her. I took up old hobbies that I had set aside. I immersed myself in reading, in books I had always wanted to read but had postponed. I even dared to write. The words flowed in a way I hadn't felt in years, as if the wound, instead of consuming me, gave me the strength to express myself. Writing became my refuge, a space where I could be honest with myself without fear of being judged. I also learned to lean on my friends and family. During the first few months after the betrayal, I isolated myself, as if my pain was something I had to face alone. But over time, I realized I didn't have to. I learned to accept the support of the people who loved me, those who were there when everything was falling apart. There was something powerful in sharing my story, in letting others help me carry the weight I felt. I realized that healing didn't have to be a solitary path. Time, as they always say, also played its part. At first, I didn't believe it. I thought the pain would never go away, that those memories would always be there, like ghosts haunting me. But as the months passed, I noticed that the good days started to become more frequent. The mornings weren't as heavy anymore, and the memories, though still present, didn't hurt as much. I learned to see them for what they were, moments from the past, fragments of a story that, although it had broken, didn't define my future. The healing process wasn't linear. There were days when I felt like I had made progress only to fall back twice as hard the next day. But I understood that healing doesn't mean forgetting or erasing the pain. It means learning to live with it in a way that doesn't consume you, that doesn't define you. And, more importantly, I learned that I deserved better, that I wasn't destined to live trapped in the pain of that betrayal. Now, looking back, I can see the path I walked with clarity. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Every step, every tear, every moment of doubt led me to a place where I can say that, although the wound is still there, I have learned to live with it. And in that process, I rediscovered myself. A new beginning, free from the chains of the past. At this point, I realized that my life is no longer the same, and that's okay. What happened, though painful, taught me more than I could have imagined. Some wounds never fully disappear, but over time, you learn to look at them not only with pain but with a kind of gratitude. Gratitude because they remind you that you are strong enough to survive. And that's perhaps the greatest lesson I learned, that despite everything, I was able to rise again. I thought a lot about what betrayal meant, about what she did and how it affected my perception of everything we shared. At first, I wanted to blame her for everything. I wanted to cling to anger because it was easier than facing my pain. But, over time, I realized that resentment only prolonged my suffering. I couldn't keep reliving that moment, that betrayal, as if it were the only thing that defined my life. I came to understand that, in the end, it's not just about what someone does to you, but how you choose to face it. It's easy to think that betrayal destroys everything that was once good, but I've learned that it doesn't have to be that way. The memories I shared with her, the moments that were genuinely happy, are still part of my story, even if they no longer hold the same meaning. Betrayal doesn't erase what existed before, but it does change how you see it. Now, when I look back, I can see the good times for what they were, moments. Not the whole story. Not the end. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting, and it doesn't mean excusing. For a long time, I thought that if I forgave her, I was minimizing what she did to me. But forgiveness isn't for her. It's for me. It's my way of letting go of the pain, of releasing the weight I carried every day. It's not that I've forgotten what happened, but I no longer allow it to control every thought, every emotion. Forgiving her was how I found peace with myself, not with what she did. Healing also allowed me to reflect on love. How could I love again after all this? At first, the idea of trusting, of opening up to someone else, terrified me. But over time, I understood that love isn't the problem, nor is trust. People make decisions, they choose how to act. One person's betrayal doesn't define what my future love life will be. It taught me that I shouldn't close myself off to opportunities out of fear of being hurt again. Life goes on, and that was the hardest thing for me to accept. At first, I couldn't imagine a future without her, as if everything we had built together was the only possible path. But slowly, I started to realize that my life wasn't tied to hers. That I had my own path, my own story, and that although she was an important part, she wasn't the end. The betrayal was just a chapter. Difficult, yes. Painful, without a doubt. But not the last chapter of my life. Today, when I look ahead, I don't feel the fear I once did. I realize that all of this has prepared me for something more. It has made me stronger, more aware of what I truly want and deserve. I don't know what the future will bring, but I'm ready to face it, without the weight of the past on my shoulders. If I've learned anything from this process, it's that pain isn't the enemy. It's part of life, part of growing. We can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond to it. And that's what gives me hope. I know that, in some way, everything I've been through has led me to this moment. And although the path was harder than I imagined, I can now say with certainty that it was worth it. So, if you ever find yourself in a similar situation, remember this: the pain will pass. Sooner or later, it will pass. And when it does, you'll discover that you're stronger than you thought. And at that moment, you'll know that you can move forward, that you can find happiness again. Because what really matters isn't how we fall, but how we choose to rise. And you? How do you think you would face a betrayal like this? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for joining me on this story.